Well, I mean, I may not know a lot about wine, but I do know what I like.
So, what do you like?
Wine.
Yeah,
It's that
well,
simple.
me too. Orange wine, red wine, white wine. I like everything. Maybe too much, or there's that study. According to that study, I
I
drink
don't
way too
what's
much.
la 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 that study. No, I don't want to hear about that study. But I will admit to spending a significant portion of my grocery dollar on wine.
So, fess up then. How much do you
How
drink?
much do I drink?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean I no. I'd rather tell you how much I make or how often I have sex actually.
Really?
Yeah, not
Not
enough.
enough.
It's a
Yeah.
running theme.
Yeah. So anyway, our guest this week, she actually knows a lot about wine, the wine industry, sort of a fair amount about journalism, a lot about marketing, and particularly how it targets women.
We're talking to Natalie MacLean, who's author of a highly successful newsletter, as well as several books about wine, including a brand new one called Wine Witch on Fire. And although it seems that she has a dream job, she had a terrible experience within the industry that kind of mirrors what happened to you, Wendy, when you left the CBC. Yeah, we're going to go there. We're going to talk a little
Yeah.
bit about that.
Yeah, we are. There's
Just
a
a little.
there's a bit of a bang. Is that me?
That's you. You're banging.
Okay, I'm sorry if I'm banging.
No, you're
Um,
fine. You're
Well, we are speaking of painful noises. We are going to talk about my time at the
a little bit.
CBC,
Yeah.
but mostly we're going to talk about how sexism is in the wine industry, what a wine taster actually does, and how much is too much.
And while we have her, we're going to get some tips, I hope, like what to look for in a less expensive wine or what wine goes with artichokes.
What with artichokes?
Yeah, that's a tough pair.
You really eat that many artichokes? Like really?
I like artichokes. All right, with no further ado, Natalie MacLean, thank you for putting up with that intro. It was really nice to see you out in your field there.
It's great to be here, Wendy and Mo. I think we could have this conversation over a glass or two. You seem like my people, my wine people.
We have, honestly, Wendy and I have a lot of conversations over a glass or three, but not usually while we're doing the podcast. But I mean, we could start at any time.
Yeah, so in the background there's this vineyard or something. So are you you're like obviously outstanding in your field. You're where are you? That's
I'm a field reporter. Yeah, that's a painting from California. And I did get permission from the artist to use it as my
oh.
backdrop. Yes, I've
Oh,
learned a
wow.
lot in the last 10 years. But yeah, it's the old Inglenook winery. It's now the Francis Ford Coppola, where you can go see all the movie
Um,
memorabilia and that sort of thing in his winery.
oh,
Yeah.
that's nice. I I want to get this out of the way because I must admit, like I knew you were a wine reviewer and I sort of knew about that, but I didn't know until I read the book about how yeah, I mean the book is about it's about drinking, it's about divorce, but it's also about defamation.
Oh,
That's in
the
the
three
title.
Ds. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
all the
there
dismal D's. The publishing team said you cannot have delirium, destitution, and
Or diarrhea.
yeah, that's right.
that would sell a lot of books. So anyway, I was kind of struck by the parallels, and then I thought, let's just ignore this because I hate bringing my story about what happened at the CBC and so on onto the podcast. But there's so. Is it okay if we talk about that?
Absolutely, go for it.
So yeah, so I mean, your thing was not to go deeply into the weeds. Your thing was basically it was you quoted a bunch of other people's reviews and you didn't properly cite their references and their backgrounds and so on and so forth. Mine was a lot more complicated. I used the N word. I should never have used the N word. I used the whole word, but I was we were it was with a bunch of colleagues and we
It,
were
it was not used in a derogatory term. You were at, this is important to point out, you were actually quoting the title of another piece that you guys wanted to explore. So,
Yeah, well, we were George Floyd had just been killed and by the police, and it was a very emotional time. And I hurt people. I should not have used that word, and I apologized immediately. We can get into that because you sort of apologized without apologizing. Anyway, it was just it blew up, and I sort of expected that the CBC would come to my defense after punishing me, which they should have. But anyway, your situation that like the whole thing like blew up, and I got
overnight.
completely I got completely trashed. You got completely trashed, but you handled things differently. First of all, you actually had a lawyer, which I never had, and the lawyer told you, whatever you do not apologize. So I just
Yes.
like, how did you figure out how to get out of that hole?
Sure. So sorry is the most expensive word in the English language because it admits guilt and it can be used litigiously against you. Um, I didn't go to journalism school, and this isn't excuse number one, but I just was so naive. This was back in 2012, kind of the heyday of aggregators, so Huffington Post and Rotten Tomatoes and so on. And when I started quoting these reviews that were actually on the LCBO, the government liquor store site for Ontario, it was because I'd noticed some other sites doing it. Anyway, I'm a glass half full kind of gal, so I thought, I'm not going to ask them to take down my reviews. I'm just going to do it too, because doesn't that provide more context for a wine? Somebody else's opinion in addition to mine. Wrong. So the legal advice I got was that I was within the bounds of fair use. Well, it's called fair dealing in Canada. And it's good if we don't go down the legal rabbit hole because this will get very
We'll never get
tedious.
out.
Yeah, this will be your lowest rated podcast ever. Uh, but it didn't matter what the legalities were, or that I offered to fix them or whatever. It was the accusation ignited literally a bonfire, and then it just spiraled from there to other websites and newspapers around the world, from the South Africa Times to the New York Post. It was crazy, all within the span of like 24, maybe 48 hours. So we didn't talk a lot about cancel culture back in 2012, but I think I can speak from experience what it's like. And even when you try to jump in and do any explaining, you add fuel to the fire. So, whether you explain, it goes wild. Whether you don't explain, then they say, hey, she's like not answering the accusations.
I found that so interesting because
Yeah.
you chose to fight back. So you gave interviews and you told people that you had made a mistake and that you were going to fix it. But you also kind of told people to screw off. Whereas I'd worked at CBC for 40 years, and it took a year of being investigated. And during that time, I just thought, they're going to want me back. I've been here for 40 years. I made a mistake. I hurt people without ever meaning to.
Yeah.
But they're going to want me back. They didn't want me back. They were perfectly happy to feed the trolls, and then the trolls take over. And as you say, like in your case, the trolls, they went
They
crazy,
went
including some of your
crazy.
colleagues.
It was unbelievable. I looked at the whole thread of after when all this broke. Then what was the day after Christmas, or it was a week before?
It was just a week before my nightmare before Christmas. Yep.
Yeah, and it was just the vitriol and the piling on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's sort of the false fellowship of hating the same person. People want to be part of something larger. And so they'll find some cause, whether, for good or bad, but there's some sort of beyond herd mentality that takes over online. And I think it's made even worse these days with bots encouraging people to get bolder and bolder, with what I call their keyboard courage. So it is really hard to to stop. You can't stop it. The only thing you can hope for is it dies from lack of oxygen, or they find the next person to go
Which they
after,
do, which
they
it
always
does,
do.
and they do.
And that's how mine ended. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting what it does to friends too. Like I had a very, very close friend who, 2 years after the fact said to me one day, I'm really sorry. I should have stood up for you more than I did, because so many people thought, well, nobody's talking about it because I didn't talk about it for a year. You did. You gave interviews. You were public. And I didn't talk about it. And so people were like, even a journalist at another network in Ottawa told a friend of mine, oh yeah, well she called somebody the end. No, I didn't. I would never do. So you're
Yeah.
right. I mean, people, trolls, they basically take information and they use it to advance their own agenda, whatever that agenda is, whether it's for good or ill. It's just, anyway, it took you 10 years to write this, and and
Slow
now here
writer.
you are. Why 10 years?
10 years because well, for 5 years, I couldn't look at the notes. At the time, the lawyer told me, take screenshots, keep your journal entries going. And so I did that almost mechanically. And then I locked it away, and I couldn't look at those notes for 5 years because, it's just, I mean, I'm not going to compare, well, I guess I am in some ways. When someone's in a car accident, they've done studies with MRI brain scans, and they will read the script of the accident to them, and the brain lights up in the exact same areas and ways as if they're experiencing the accident. So they're not remembering it, they're reliving it. So for 5 years, I just could not look at those notes. And so after 5 years, I thought, well, this story just keeps ricocheting around in my head. I need to let it out, at least on paper. And so I did as a private exercise for making sense of what had happened. But I had no intention of publishing a book.
I've got a whole stash of notes, screenshots,
Yes.
and they're
You're,
all, yeah.
give
So,
it time, Wendy. Give it time.
yeah. Oh, I mean,
Exactly.
I've got quotes. I've got proof of people saying things that would get them fired for like way worse than what I
Or
supposedly did. So it's, yeah. So
or
another
you
5 years will be done.
or you let it go. I mean,
Yes.
I've not experienced what you guys have experienced. I've had my own traumas, but nothing quite like that. And there's also an argument for saying, okay, shit happened. But I still, my talent hasn't been taken. My talent, well, whatever our talent is, wasn't taken away. And let's
Sure.
focus on that, which I think you've also done because you have climbed out of the ashes of that year. You also underwent a divorce. Like it was
Yeah,
just the
it
worst
was a
year
bad
ever.
vintage. It was a really bad vintage,
A lot
personally
of
and
D's.
professionally. Yeah, exactly, all the D's. But to pick up on both your points, the turnaround in terms of deciding to write about it publicly. I mean, I kept talking with women in the industry because what happened was pre Me Too, pre Harvey Weinstein, and the wine industry is so clubby. I mean, there is a real social grapevine where you can get blackballed or delisted very quickly, ostracized. So after those 5 years, and after hearing so many stories, I thought, well, I've heard memoirists say, well, I write my story so other people feel less alone. I thought, well, what does that really mean? If our situations are so different, mine and the readers, how can my story help anybody? And so I had to think about that for a while. Like, what am I doing here? But I think, I make the comparison like when we're parents, and we all have, I think, children, adults in their 23, 24-ish
Yeah.
range.
Yeah.
Bang on.
Yeah, but when they were little, we taught them, like, we asked them questions. So, are you hungry? Are you sad? Because we're trying to give them that vocabulary to express their emotions so that they don't have to always resort to crying and tantrums and just screaming. And I think as adults, we forget that our feelings get more complex as we age. And, Brené Brown, I love her, Dr. Brené Brown, in her Atlas of the Heart book, she deals with 87 emotions because we either lost or don't have the vocabulary to express ourselves. But when we can express ourselves, when we find the words, I think it unlocks something in us, whether it's peace or relief or whatever. So the stories that I'm getting back from early readers is that they are finding themselves in this book, but through a completely different experience. So, they may not have gone through a divorce, but they've probably felt loneliness or the longing for love. They may not have been, chased down by an angry mob online, but they've probably felt career disappointment or a fear of the future. So what I think a good memoir does is allow you to experience all those emotions, put names to them, articulate them, but that you can go through somebody else's story safely, and see how someone can emerge on the other side, stronger, wiser.
You talk about sexism in the industry. I mean, Maureen in radio faced a lot of sexism. We can talk about
Yeah.
that. In television, certainly, there's a lot. But how bad is it in the wine industry?
It's pretty deep rooted. I can't avoid all these puns, but sorry. I'll try to find another metaphor if I can, but it's my world. Um, so the wine world is so, I said, so clubby. It's much less formalized than the restaurant industry. So most wineries in Canada and the US have fewer than 20 employees. Most don't have an HR department, let alone a harassment policy. So, and all the mentorships or training is usually one-on-one. So whether you want to become a winemaker or a sommelier or whatever you want to do in the industry, it's usually a one-on-one relationship with someone with a much bigger power differential, which of course lends itself to abuse. Lots of studies have been out there. I mean, 2012, 10 years ago, so must be all better and brighter now. It's not. They did a 2018 study where 89% of women in the hospitality industry, which includes wineries and restaurants, experienced some form of sexual harassment. In 2020, the New York Times broke the story of the Court of Master Sommeliers, where there was allegations and 21 women came forward about getting sexually harassed by the Court of Master Sommeliers, which is a really hoity-toity kind of a designation you can get in the wine world. So that's 2020. And I think there are more stories that are going to come out. It's really hard to talk about it in the wine industry. And that's another reason I'm doing this book, because I figure you can't kill me twice. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong.
It's and this is sort of a corollary of that. This is how women are treated within the industry. Then on the outside as consumers.
Yes.
That's something that you've been very outspoken about. And I was just saying to Wendy before you joined us that immediately if I see something that's pink and says like, well, girls' night out is probably the most prominent example, or has a rose in the bottom of the bottle, it's like, stop that. Stop selling me that based on pretty, and it's been insidious, and it's encouraged women to embrace the idea that you're not having fun unless you're getting bombed, really.
Yeah. And that we as women need a reason to drink. It's girls' night out, or it's
Mom's
a fancy
little
occasion.
helper. Yeah.
Or mom's had an exhausting day, so no one's thanking mom, so be damn mom will thank herself with another glass of wine. And the message on the bottle is that we are, we're either babes or battle axes. So babes, drawn to, stilettos and high heels and red lips and roses, or we're battle axes. I mean, there's Mad Housewife is a brand and so on. But no, the marketing that I see directed towards men in wine is about sophistication and complexity. And a man has a drink because he wants to. He doesn't have to ask.
Yeah.
But yeah, women buy 80% of wine. We're still household purchasers of everything. We drink 66% of it.
I never thought of, I'm a raw feminist kind of person, but I never thought that my drinking was actually a feminist reaction.
Oh yeah. It's like the Virginia Slim cigarettes of the 1960s, those torches of freedom.
You've come a long way, baby. Not if you're still calling me baby.
Exactly.
But what about the artichokes? That's what Maureen really wants to know.
Well, we can get into pairings, but like the practical stuff. But I want to ask you before we get into that very specific stuff. So I was fascinated. And it reminded me, I think Elvis Costello or Frank Zappa once said, writing about music is like dancing about architecture. And I thought that applies to writing about wine, which is such a sensual and physical experience, is tough. You are a what do you call them? Not a super taster.
Yes. That doesn't mean I drink a lot, though. No. I used to.
Tell us about that and how you translate that into writing about it, and then we'll get to the artichokes.
Sure. Super taster is a phenomenon that was discovered in 1999 by Dr. Linda Barastock. And she tested various people, how dense their taste buds are. And she discovered that the phenomenon of super taster applies to about 25% of the population, most of whom are women. And it just means you have a lot of taste buds. She said they live in a sensory neon world. It's like having 500 fingers instead of 5. So what it makes you... Yeah. But
I've seen that in a movie.
It gets worse. So it makes you a more sensitive taster, not necessarily a better taster. That comes with practice. But what goes along with that is a sensitivity to your world. So when I got tested to see if I was one, the person testing me said, "I'll bet you take out the tags of all your clothing," and I
Oh,
do.
I do
I bet you
that,
have, yeah, bet
but
you
I'm
have
not a wine
thermostat wars.
reviewer.
Well, no, but
But
you're super sensitive. Go on, Natalie.
sensitive, yeah, like
Huh.
living in a neon world. Have thermostat wars with your family. Like you're just super attuned to every little muscle twitch someone makes or whatever.
Huh. Well, that's what we
Tea, not
say anyway.
coffee.
Very attuned. Very
Very
attuned.
attuned.
So,
Yes.
can you not be a sommelier if you're not a super taster?
Oh, sure. You can be definitely can be a sommelier, you can be a wine writer, and so on. It's not a prerequisite. In fact, some would argue that can work against you sometimes because you will come across a very big wine, a full-bodied, lots of oak, lots of alcohol, and it's just like, turn it down. It's like the guy who's too loud at the bar. It's like you don't want to take that one home. But you have to recognize like there's a broad spectrum of palates, and so when I review wines, I'm reviewing it for people who love full-bodied wines. You love this wine, that
Right.
kind of thing. Yeah.
So I was fascinated to hear about the setup that you have. So you've got cases of wine all over your house that people send you, and you try to taste 30 bottles a day.
Yes.
So I have two questions. Um, is there a lot of spitting? And secondly, what happens to all the open bottles?
Can we
And do you
count
need
them?
any help with that? I guess that's three questions. But
Yes. Yeah, recycling day here is just an embarrassment on the
well, it
street.
is here too,
Crowds
and I'm not.
fighting.
I have my blue box, but tell me what like so you get sent all this stuff.
Yeah.
How and you take notes and you go down the row and you sip all these
Yes.
wines and you clean your palate. Tell me
And
more.
then what
Like,
happens?
then what happens?
Well, the difference between tasting and drinking is thinking and spitting. So you do have to expectorate spit, or else you will be sloshed. Like, excuse me. The best time to taste in the day is at 9 a.m. And facing 30, full-bodied Cabernets from Chile is not exactly, a, a lovely thing. Although I have no sympathy for my job. Um, but yeah, I will taste usually actually later in the day, compare like to like, line up those bottles. And then what I do, I only take an ounce or two and then spit it out. I recork all the bottles and pass them on to other sommeliers or writers here in the community so that the wineries who are sending me samples will get more than one review, of course, only if we like it.
So we're not
Yeah,
being
yeah.
invited over, I guess, Maureen.
No, sadly, my friends looked like, oh, is that what you do with them? Oh,
Oh
okay.
yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's
Oh
very
well.
worthy.
So what about the artichokes?
So yeah,
Oh yeah.
pairing. You have a knack for pairing, like unparalleled.
It's my superpower. So artichokes, getting to the heart of the matter. So
Ah, oh.
artichokes, I can't help. I'm also like I come from Nova Scotia, so it's all about puns and cannot help myself. Anyway, so artichokes and asparagus both produce a natural organic compound called cynarin, which is tastes very bitter. So what happens is that after you eat artichokes, everything you eat and drink after that is going to taste sweeter by comparison. So that really wreaks havoc on wine, especially if you have maybe even an off dry, just a little bit of sweetness in your wine. It's going to taste really cloying and sweet. So the answer or the recommendation I give is to go with a really bone dry white wine. So it's going to bring up the fruit, make it taste a little sweeter but not cloying, and your taste buds will be happy and your artichoke will be tasting better as well.
Good to know.
Yeah.
So we've debunked the red only red with red meat and only white with chicken. That we've broken down those barriers, I guess. But with or rosé.
Oh, yes, rosé all day. Although I'm supposed to be talking moderation after this book, or else I
We'll
haven't
get to
learned
that,
anything.
or we won't.
Rosé is a beautiful wine. Just love it. Like, so we have to forget the 1970s, 80s sweet, cloying, syrupy pink stuff. Today's rosés are beautiful. They could be bone dry. Not that they have to be bone dry to be good, because we shouldn't be doing any wine shaming with people who like sweet
Sweet
wine.
wines.
Can we stop doing that? But rosé I love because it has all of the flavor of a red wine often,
It's a
but
baby
none of the
red,
heavy.
isn't it? I mean, a lot of
It's
people have no idea what rose is. Some people
yeah,
think it's red and white poured together,
yeah.
which,
That would be
you
the
know,
cheap way.
yeah.
But the good way is that you grow good red grapes, and it's called saignée or bleeding, which doesn't sound good, but it's the runoff, the lighter pink juice from the first crush of the grapes. So it's got all that flavor, but none of the heavy tannin, oak, and alcohol.
Well, I have a quote for you, and it's from someone who makes bread for a living. And it's, well, I don't know who it's originally from, but it's everything in moderation, including
Including
moderation.
moderation. Yeah.
Yes,
So I think we
exactly.
Yes.
should apply that to drinking. So yeah, so you're like a spitter now, right? Like you used to drink a lot, and now you drink
Yeah,
just a
that's got to
little.
be tough. That has got to be really tough because you can't not drink. That's
Hmm.
your job.
Yes.
Um, and I would also, while we're on the subject of tasting and spitting, I mean, do you get the full effect if you don't swallow? And by the way,
That's a
if
good
you're just
question.
joining us, we're talking about wine.
It's a good question. So there's five aspects to tasting wine: the sight, the smell, the feel, the body, and the finish. The finish is how long after you swallow does that impression last. 5 seconds is considered long, like as in all
Long
sexual
finish.
pleasures. I think longer's better. But anyway, or 1 to 2 seconds is short. 3 seconds medium. I know that sounds really technical, but it's basically, is it still coming back to you like a good memory,
Hmm.
smell wise? So yeah, it is hard to evaluate the wines. You are absorbing through your soft tissue of your mouth anyway. But if you really want to be, you would let a small trickle go down. But when you're tasting 30 wines and so on, you really, I have to watch it in terms of you know
So
how
how
much
much of it is
consuming.
BS? Because it's a, like dandelion this and dog
Yeah,
poo this and
Barnyard, and I love
yeah.
Barnyard. Yeah.
Yeah,
fruit
like some of
salad.
that stuff is like, yeah, you went to school and whatever, and some of it is, oh yeah, no, I do taste the cherries, or I do, but I don't know,
Yep.
who comes up with all that stuff, and is it all true? You can tell us, top secret.
Okay. Okay. Just between us then. Lean in here. Okay. Um, Yeah, the vocabulary of wine has evolved over time and needs to go a long way because there's even embedded sexism with calling wines feminine and masculine and all the rest of it. But when it comes to this fruit salad stuff, I think that is, you know, um, wine succeeds where words fail because wine is a sensory experience and it's hard to trap that in words. So people are trying and struggling with all of these descriptors. But when I teach my online courses, I tell my students just smell everything in your world around you. When you cut open um, fruit or vegetables, that's when it's most pungent. Smell it. Develop a smell vocabulary. We live in a world that really we've attuned our visual sense and our auditory sense, but we've lost our sniffer sense that we used to have to avoid dying. So smell everything. Smell the leather furniture. Just don't let anybody see you doing it. Smell the cinnamon on your toast. I'm practicing for my wine course. But you have to develop your own vocabulary. One course that I taught, this woman said, "Well, that smells like the Dallas airport," and everybody's puzzled. We were tasting Riesling, and then we put it together. Sometimes Riesling can taste or smell a bit like petrol, and it's a good thing. So she's
Hmm.
smelling the jet fuel. Another one said, "That smells like
Wow.
my son's gerbil cage." We're tasting
We don't
Chardonnays.
read that on the bottle.
No, you don't, but
Oh,
it's a whole lot more
cedar?
realistic.
Was it
Yes,
cedar?
the
Yeah.
wood chips from the
Huh.
gerbil's cage.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can be real about these descriptors. You don't have to get all fancy, and it's about developing your own smell vocabulary so that you heighten your own pleasure. I think what we appreciate or what we understand, we can appreciate a bit more. But it's okay if you don't want to. Just drink the wine. Don't
So
think.
just saying, I sometimes say to my husband something as profound as, "It smells like dog poo, but in a good way."
In a good way. Well, like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
well, like manure. There's that
Manure.
sort of
That's that
earthy
barnyard
smell.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it's a common characteristic or aroma in great Pinot Noir.
Hmm.
Some people don't like it for obvious reasons. Sometimes it's caused by Brettanomyces, which is a bacterial infection, but some people actually like it. So it just depends on your taste.
I know it's weird, olfactory. I love the smell of markers and
Yeah.
gasoline. You know
Oh,
that?
me too.
Yeah. Oh,
Gasoline. Oh, oh, I could just stay at a gas station all day. But
isn't
I think
that,
it's
and
because my
it's,
father was a mechanic. I don't know.
but it's
Something about it.
weird. It's just
I
like
love
that
it.
attraction. I don't want to taste it. I don't want to, but
Yes.
the smell is heady. Just as an aside, I remember, I think it was Diptyque or one of the, when the first really expensive candles were being introduced, and there was one that was called Versailles.
Mm.
And I smelt it, and I said to the person, I think it was at Liberty in London, and I said, "This smells a little bit like pee." And she said, "Well, it's funny that you should say that
It's
because
expensive pee.
it's very expensive." But she said Versailles, they used to pee behind the tapestries, and so
Ew.
that smell. I know, well, they didn't have plumbing, and so that smell is sort of imbued in the wood and the. So if you go to Versailles,
Wow.
there's
Yum.
distinctness from that, and so they put that in the candle, and I'm like, wow, that's
Wow.
crazy. I didn't buy it.
You should be a sommelier. I mean, if you could smell the pee,
That's right.
No, I
then
have to my sign. Well, that's the other thing too. You have to be in a certain like I have. Wendy's been recovering from a cold for the last 6 years, and
6 weeks, 6 weeks.
6 weeks, and it's allergy season right now, and that you've got to
Mm.
be especially sensitive to that because
Yeah.
what if like COVID? What if you lost your
Yeah.
sense of taste and smell?
Well, during my terrible vintage, I did temporarily lose my sense of smell.
Hmm.
And, I was smelling, tasting, trying to a bunch of Shirazes. And I was like, oh no, I don't smell anything. And it was temporary, but, I did some research on it and talked to my doctor, but depression can cause
Really?
a loss of smell because your brain size shrinks and the olfactory sense is very sensitive to that. And so I think it was probably related. It scared the heck out of me though, because my nose is my job.
Yeah, for
We got to
sure.
wrap up in a minute, but well, at first I was struck by the similarities with, like, I met my dad when I was 18. You met yours when you were 16. That, leaves a bit of a mark, which may become apparent in another 10 or 15 years. Um, but
Yes.
you talk about, devote your book to your mom. And yeah, I think my mom, she died 2 years ago, and I've been thinking about a lot about her since. But it's all about being brave, and I think Maureen, I think you and I think that's why we invite people on the podcast, is because they're trying to be brave.
No scaredy
Um,
pants allowed.
Just women of ill repute.
Well,
I love
that
that.
makes it stronger
Yeah.
or funny anyway,
Absolutely. Just
but
like witches. Like, I think some of these words we just need to stop being afraid of and embrace. I mean, reclaim is an overused word, but for me, a witch is a wise woman who's walked through the flames and emerged on the other side knowing the measure of her powers and embraced them.
which is why your book is called, I want to call it The Wine, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but it's Wine, I do. It's
Yeah.
Wine Witch on Fire. And are you going to be doing a book tour or is it,
I am.
yeah?
Toronto, May 10th, Niagara, May 13th, Halifax, June 12th, Calgary sometime. Ottawa is May 31st. So,
That's where
yeah,
you're living now, right?
this is
You're
where
in
I am
Ottawa?
now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's
no,
always
she's
books
in
and
the
bottles.
field.
She's in the field.
I'm
She's
in the
outstanding in her
field.
field.
You know
Yeah.
where to get me.
If you're watching us on YouTube, you'll see that that's a beautiful mural. Natalie MacLean, you're just as we're going to say after you leave, wasn't she lovely? Thank you so much for being so open and helpful. And now we know what to pair with artichokes. That's the very least that we've learned this week.
I'm glad that I could help you with that. That was my number one mission and reason for being here today. If anything, I can save them from their artichoke disasters. And seriously, I so appreciate both of you allowing me to chat with you and by extension, your audience. I have binge listened to all of your episodes and absolutely love your take on
Aw.
life.
Oh,
and
well,
would love
thank
to have
you.
a glass of wine with you
Oh,
sometime.
that's almost certain to happen. And your newsletter, just to subscribe, just go to nataliemaclean.com.
Yep. And sometimes people find that hard to spell. There's many ways to spell it. So I've also got the URL right now, winewitchonfire.com.
Okay.
For the book, I've got bonuses for the book if people purchase it. I'll send them signed book plates. There's a free companion guide for book clubs, wine groups, and individual readers. So there's lots of stuff there at winewitch.com.
And Maureen and I will be by your house. I
leave
guess
your
on
empties
Sundays.
outside.
Yeah.
Recycling day is on
Recycling.
Fridays.
Good
So
to know.
book your tickets.
Good to know. Natalie MacLean, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you both. Cheers.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
So
Well,
should I
she
say
was- she was
lovely? Well, some are lovelier than others.
They are.
But she, yeah. Anyway, I get very nervous talking
I
about
know
the whole
you do.
cancellation thing.
I know. But it's amazing how many times we've had guests on in the past who have, and that's kind of one of the reasons why we started this podcast, is there are people that come up against, and not just women, who come up against some serious roadblock in their careers or their personal lives and have to get around it. And that's, we bring empathy to the table because that's happened to us. So
Yeah, there were so many other things I wanted to ask her, like
tomatoes, hard to pair.
and asparagus. I mean, I
Yeah,
didn't know that
yeah.
asparagus and artichokes are in the
Yeah.
same family, but only one makes your pee funny. So we didn't get to talk about the really important things.
I think we covered it all off. I've done, you've been to wine tastings, haven't you? Where you do spit into the thing. I've been to a few.
Yeah, no, my husband's really into wine, and he would spend his days spitting into glasses, and I'm like, oh, look outside. I'm not really interested.
To me, it's like, wow, this is good. My reaction is not to spit it. This is good. I'll have more.
Yeah,
Which
I don't
is-
know how many times we dropped the hint, like we'd like to come over and collect the
Yeah,
bottles.
well,
but-
I think we'd absolutely be welcome to. Well, not collect. I think she'd like to have a glass of. I'd like to have a glass of wine with her. I'd like to have a glass of wine with a lot of our guests. So I guess that's a good thing, except for the ones that don't drink. But I'd still, they could have ginger ale.
Yeah, well, we didn't get into the study, so we'll have to have a conversation about. I don't think it was 2 sips a week, and it was 2 glasses a week. Or
Yeah,
would kill you,
I know
right?
that's real.
So,
That was maybe the worst news of 2022.
yeah, well, can't fix everything at once. Chins up,
Bottoms up.
bottom up.
Cheers.
Bye.